This is Harsh Rules. I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play Holland 44. Holland 44 was released in 2017 by GMT Games and designed by Mark Simonich. This game supports up to 2 players and takes from 4 to 15 hours to play. Before we begin this episode, I'd like to recognize the Harsh Rules Patreon supporters that help make content like this possible. If you'd like to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/harshrules to learn more. And once again, thank you for your support. Another way you can support the channel is by liking and subscribing. Liking a video helps me understand what content is successful with this audience. As for subscribing, new content appears on this channel first. While you may have found your way here from Board Game Geek or other sites, in the future, I'll also be adding more exclusive content that may only be found here. The best way to be informed when I upload new videos is to subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications. Once again, thanks for watching, and now let's get to the video. Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to learn about Holland 44's primary game pieces called units. Units represent the game's armed forces on double-sided cardboard counters. Let's begin by outlining the military organizations that these units belong to. The Allied forces in Operation Market Garden were represented primarily by the British, the US, and Polish members. However, a small number of Canadian and Dutch forces also participated. Each of these nations' counters are identified by a unique color as shown on the screen. Germany represents the sole Axis power involved in Market Garden. Germany's counters are color-coded by its branches of service. The Wehrmacht, the German army, the SS, Nazi Germany's elite guard, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, and the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy. Each of these German division counters also has its own identifying color. Each unit's type, its military symbol or size indicator, has a colored background. This color identifies its formation. Formations indicate which units are coordinated to fight together based on their position or entry point on the map. Units from different formations that attempt to attack together may be penalized as their efforts are not fully coordinated. When conducting combat with multiple formations, a lead formation must be identified. Their attack ratings will be calculated at full strength. All supporting formations' attack ratings are halved. Germany's formations roll up to a service branch that controls a particular area of the map. Therefore, you may see SS units that are a part of Wehrmacht formations and vice versa. On the Allied side, each division or independent brigade is its own formation. Keep these rules in mind. When formations overlap, you may have to assign specific lead formations to get the best combat results. These concepts will become clearer once we cover combat. In Operation Market Garden, each side deployed a wide range of personnel and equipment. To reflect this, the game's counters have either a military symbol or an icon that identifies the unit type. Unit types are divided into 2 groups: non-mechanized units and mechanized units. Most non-mechanized units are classified as infantry. Infantry-class units have an advantage in movement. They may cross unbridged canals and rivers. Mechanized units can be further divided into infantry and vehicles. Be aware, though, there is a difference between mechanized infantry and vehicles. Vehicles, shaded in blue on this chart, are combat units whose firepower or main function comes mainly from the vehicle itself. Infantry-class units in the mechanized group merely have motorized transportation. Although they have greater speed and firepower, vehicles do have disadvantages when compared to infantry. They may only enter and exit polder and marsh hexes by way of road. They may only cross canals and rivers at bridges and ferries. and there is a limit to the number of vehicle unit steps that may cross a ferry hex side each turn. Vehicles can be broken down even further into standard vehicles, armored units, and tanks. Armored units and tanks can provide players with a potential armor shift. This can increase their force's odds in combat. Also, some units have anti-tank capabilities. If the anti-tank unit's armor ratings are higher than those of the attacking tanks, then the attacking tank's ratings are halved. Finally, some vehicles are classified as reconnaissance units. When reconnaissance units are alone in a hex and they are attacked, they can ignore the step loss requirement but not the retreat portion on a D1 or a DS result. Now that we understand the variations in unit type, let's look at the layout of a unit counter. First, let's look at the counter layout for an infantry unit. This is a parachute infantry unit from the 1st British Airborne Division. This identification can be made by the colored military symbol in the center of the counter, the unit ID, and the division emblem. Above the military symbol is a Roman numeral which corresponds to the unit's size. In the upper right-hand corner is the unit's setup or arrival information. Setup units have white text or a white background. Units without this have plain text that indicates the turn and the entry area the unit comes into play. For example, this unit arrives on turn 3 in the Y entry area. The border of the map identifies each entry area by letter. Below this shows the number of steps that the unit has remaining. Units may have up to 3 steps. When a unit is hit, the counter is flipped over and the step number is reduced. With 3-step units, once a second hit is sustained, the counter is replaced with a remnant. If you remember from setup, remnants can be found on the upper left-hand corner of the map. The bottom 3 numbers are the unit's key stats. The first number refers to the unit's attack strength, the next number its defense strength, and the final number the unit's movement allowance. The defense strength may also have a colored background. This is the unit's morale rating, which ties to its quality or experience. A white background indicates a low-quality unit. In other words, it's green or inexperienced. No background means the unit is experienced. In other words, a veteran. And a red background indicates the unit is an elite or a high-quality unit. Before we move on, let's pause for a moment so we can cover the concepts of movement and combat. This will help give you context for the rest of the video. We'll cover the gory details of movement in a subsequent episode, but here's the general concept. There are 3 types of movement. Think of them as low gear, main gear, and high gear. Tactical movement is that low gear. With tactical movement, the unit may move 1 to 2 hexes regardless of the terrain cost. For some units, this is the only movement they have available, and some bulky units in this class might be penalized for using the full 2 hexes, but we'll cover all that later. Tactical movement also allows combat units to enter another unit's zone of control and conduct combat. Next up is terrain entry cost movement, or tech movement. This is the main gear. This is a pay-as-you-go system common to war games. Each piece of terrain has a specific cost. If the unit has the movement allowance points available, they can buy their way into the hex. Tech movement also allows combat units to enter another unit's zone of control and conduct combat. Finally, we have extended movement. This is the high gear. Essentially, this is just tech movement with 2 additional movement points allowed. However, this can only be used if the unit's movement ends in an empty hex without a zone of control overlapping it. So basically, the last hex cannot have a friendly unit, an enemy unit, or a zone of control overlapping it. These restrictions by nature prevent combat from occurring. However, extended movement using roads can greatly extend a unit's range. So these sacrifices might be worth it. Combat is resolved in roughly 3 steps. First, players sum and compare the attack ratings to the total defense strength to calculate an odds ratio. Each unit's stats may be further halved or doubled by additional formations, terrain, anti-armor, and a lot of other factors that we'll cover in a later video. The odds ratio is then matched to its column on the Combat Results Table, or CRT. Next, overall battlefield conditions, such as the presence of armor units, are then evaluated. These findings may shift the column to use left or right on the table. But once the final column is determined, a die is rolled to receive a combat result, which is a short abbreviated code. This abbreviated result is then deciphered using an explanation of results glossary, at least until you've memorized everything, that tells you the step losses, the retreat requirements, and any advancement options to apply to the units. This is just to give you an idea of the concept. We'll cover the rules in much greater detail in a later episode. Vehicle units share many of the same stats as infantry units, so let's talk about the key difference: the armor rating. Most vehicle units have an armor rating that is displayed as a superscript number to the right of its attack strength. In combat, the attacker's highest armor rating is compared to the defender's highest armor rating. The winner receives an armor column shift bonus on the combat results table. The defender may also have anti-tank units on their side. An anti-tank unit can be identified by its armor rating being surrounded by a red or yellow box. And if the anti-tank armor rating is higher than the attacker's highest armor rating, then all tank units' attack ratings are halved. Be aware though, when an anti-tank unit is used to attack rather than defend, its armor rating is lowered by 1 point. Another type of vehicle unit is the recon unit. These vehicle units can be identified by their movement allowance being in a green circle. Recon units, when defending alone in a hex, can ignore the D1 and D6 combat results step loss requirements. Be aware though, the other requirements of these combat results are still applicable, but the unit can avoid the step losses. Next, let's look at some units with unique functions. First up are artillery units. In general, artillery units may provide the attacker with a right column shift on the combat results table, and defenders with a +1 die roll modifier on the determined defense table. Each artillery unit may provide support to only one combat per combat phase. The target must be within range, and the artillery unit on its ready side. Be aware though, there are also some restrictions. Artillery units that are scattered, engaged, disrupted, in full retreat, or under a moved marker may not provide artillery support. They may not provide support to their own hex. And they may only support an attack with combat units from the same formation. In other words, the same military symbol color. And when the artillery unit is used, it is flipped over to its fired side. During the artillery resupply phase, the unit will be flipped back to its available side. Artillery units also have the following properties. They are one-step free stacking units. They may not be selected as the lead unit for determined defense. They may not advance after combat, and they may not be used in breakthrough combat. As for movement, artillery units are vehicle-type units. However, they are unique in that they have two ways of moving in the game. First, they can use tactical movement to move one hex and provide artillery support in the same turn, or move two hexes but become disrupted. The second way an artillery unit can move is with a moved marker. A moved marker allows a player to pack up their artillery unit and spend 5 movement points to relocate them. During this time, the artillery unit cannot be used. The move marker has a number of advantages. The primary one is that while under the marker, an artillery unit is allowed to use road movement costs and extended movement. These advantages will become clearer once we cover movement in the next episode. However, the marker must remain on the unit until the next friendly movement phase when the owning player can remove it, reposition it, or keep it on the unit. Let's talk about another unique unit in this game, the Airborne Supply Head. Normally, units receive their supplies from friendly entry areas at the edge of the map. Unfortunately for the Allies, most of these areas are under German control. However, for the Allies in the garden portion of the mission, they can trace their supply to entry area M, N, and O at the bottom of the map. Later, in turn 7, entry area A and L will become friendly as well. However, for the market portion of the mission, the airborne units are deployed at drop hexes far from friendly supply. To remedy this at the beginning of the game, a temporary supply package is dropped with each airborne division. These supply drops are known as airborne supply heads. These units can provide supply, but only to airborne units in their division until turn 5. After that, the unit is flipped over to its depleted side. From then on, an airborne supply head can only be used to supply that division's artillery units, allow returnees to return to their division, and serve as a drop hex. Airborne supply head counters also have several unique rules. The bottom of the counter shows 2 stats. However, the positioning of the stat on the far left can be a little confusing. This is the unit's defense strength, not its attack rating. The unit may only use this stat in defense if they are the only unit in the hex. They also only have 1 step, but if stacked with other friendly units, it may not be used to satisfy a step loss. And, although they do not have a white border, they are also considered a free stacking unit. These units can generate a zone of control, but cannot form a zone of control bond with other units. And their movement allowance is also limited to tactical movement, which means their movement range is always 1 or 2 hexes. And now that we have a better idea of the different types of units in the game, let's learn about the effect that markers can have on them. Before we close out this episode, let's discuss the various unit markers and their effects. Generally, markers are assigned to track combat, out of supply status, and adverse airdrop results. Regardless of assignment, all markers are either removed or replaced with a marker of less severity in the recovery phase. Next, let's walk through the most common marker types, beginning with the disrupted and full retreat markers. Disrupted markers are applied through combat results and for some special units as a penalty for overextending their tactical movement. Disrupted markers severely limit a unit's abilities. Once applied, a unit is limited to being able to generate a zone of control and provide an armor rating. Also, other friendly units may enter or pass through their hex without becoming disrupted themselves. Disrupted units are limited to tactical movement of 1 to 2 hexes. They may not attack, and they cannot form a zone of control bond. Their defense strength is also halved. They may not leave an entry area, they cannot blow or rewire bridges, they may not be the lead unit in determined defense, and the list goes on. Unit-specific restrictions can be summarized as, nope, not gonna happen. As bad as that is, full retreat is even worse. Full retreat is the next level of severity. A full retreat marker has all the restrictions of a disrupted marker, and some additional restrictions. However, a unit in full retreat has its movement allowance restored because they're in full panic mode. Unless stacked with a disrupted or good order combat unit, not an unknown unit, if an enemy unit moves or advances into a hex adjacent to them, they will immediately retreat 2 hexes. However, a unit in full retreat may still move adjacent to an enemy unit if a friendly unit in good order is adjacent to their position. Next, let's discuss the engaged marker. Engaged markers are assigned as a combat result, but only to defending units. These markers penalize units in the following ways. An engaged unit is only allowed to conduct tactical movement. Tactical movement is limited to a range of 1 to 2 hexes. However, an engaged unit may only move 1 hex safely. If they move into a second hex, they will become disrupted. For combat, an engaged unit's attack strength is halved. They may not attack across unbridged canals or participate in major river assaults. However, they may still be eligible to advance after combat. Engaged artillery units cannot provide support, bridging units cannot repair bridges, and engineers cannot participate in river assaults or ferry creation. Engaged airborne supply heads may not receive or provide returnees or receive replacements. Scattered markers are assigned as a result of an adverse effect on the airborne landing table. Airborne units with this marker may only use tactical movement and move 1 to 2 hexes. Also, their attack strength is halved, and airdropped artillery units may not provide support. A spent marker may be added following combat with an unknown unit. When assigned, a spent unit may not attack in the combat phase. The spent marker is merely a reminder that the unit has already conducted combat in the movement phase. Finally, let's discuss the effects of out-of-supply markers. These markers are assigned if a unit cannot trace a path back to a friendly supply source. Holland 44 has 2 types of supply sources for Allied players. As we saw earlier, Garden units, the Allies' ground offensive, has access to supply sources at the bottom of the map. Airborne units must subsist off their airborne supply heads. All other entry area supply sources serve Germany. When a unit is out of supply, they're limited to the following abilities. They have their full defense strength. They have their zone of control and zone of control bonding abilities, and they have full morale and armor effects. However, they also have the following restrictions. They must use tactical movement, which is only 1 to 2 hex spaces, and they're not allowed a road bonus. Their attack strength is halved, and they cannot advance after combat. And for artillery, they cannot be flipped to their ready side. A special note here, the game supplies 2 different colors of out-of-supply markers. This is to clearly communicate in the case that both German and Allied units are in the same state and next to each other, which units are out of supply. There are also 2 out-of-supply markers for the 1st and 82nd Division that can be used to indicate all units in that division being out of supply. And with that, this is a great place to break for this episode. Throughout these last 2 episodes, we've been working to build a strong foundation of context for playing this game. In the next episode, we will take everything we've learned and go deep into the sequence of play. So make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell icon for notifications, and keep your eyes out for the next episode. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like and share with your friends. To be the first notified when the next episode of Harsh Rules becomes available, please hit the bell icon for notifications. And as always, this has been Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.